compassion is the action of empathy, and something that we need to practice daily. Micah Bazant is a visual artist who works with social justice movements to help envision what our world could look like. So with that, please help me welcome to the stage Micah Bazant.
Wow, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm not nervous at all. And it's so good to be awake with you, and I loved hearing the mission and just celebrating all of our creativity and our power to reimagine the world. My name is Micah. They, them pronouns work great, and I'm currently the artist in residence at Forward Together, which is a national organization that works for rights, recognition, and resources for all families. And I make art on many different racial justice issues in collaboration with organizers across the country. But what I'm going to share with you today is mostly my artwork and other people's artwork for trans justice. So in the middle of preparing for this talk, I got the news about the murder of Allie Lee Steinfeld. How many people here have heard about Allie? She was a young trans feminine person, 17 years old in Missouri. She is the 21st person that we know of who's trans to be brutally murdered this year. And as some of you know, every year for the past 3 years has broken the record for the most trans murders on record. And almost all of those murders are of Black trans women and femmes. Some people have estimated that the average life expectancy for trans women of color is 35 years old. So we're in a state of emergency that is generally not recognized by our movements or by mainstream LGBT movements. A lot of the murders are really brutal, and people aren't just being killed, they're being savagely tortured and having things done that communicate a depth of fear about trans people and our existence, and how that upsets the social order in a very fundamental way. So I was sitting with this death as I was thinking about our talk, and thinking about how this death and life has been a central engine of my work, and trying to just sit with this grief and not look away from it, and grieving but not stopping at the grief, and not letting ourselves or our loved ones be defined by just grief or oppression. And this is what compassion means to me. It's a practice of sitting with pain and oppression so it doesn't have power over us, so we can lessen our suffering and build a different world together. For me, being trans is at its core an act of radical imagination. It requires a creative process. It's not just imagining oneself into being, it's imagining a completely different world, a world I've never seen or experienced that treasures all trans people. I can't live without the project of imagining that world. It's a world where there are creatures who are so free, I can't even imagine them yet. I can't live without the project of collectively unearthing our genders from the vice of white supremacist binaries. This creative process is something I've learned from my trans ancestors, people like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera and Lady Java and thousands of people whose names we will never know, who imagined and birthed the trans and queer liberation movement. I've learned this from young trans women of color today, people like Isa Noyola and Elle Hearns and thousands of others who are on the front lines, imagining a world without police and ICE and borders and prisons. I believe that people who are most negatively impacted by oppression hold the knowledge and experience necessary to dismantle those systems of oppression. Trans women and trans femmes of color are living at the nexus of many different systems of oppression: white supremacy, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia. By supporting trans women and femmes of color to lead at the center of our movements, we strengthen our fight for the liberation of everyone impacted by white supremacy, misogyny, transphobia, and homophobia. In other words, all of us. Or as Miss Major says, when Black trans women get free, we all get free. So about 2 years ago, on a Friday night, I got a request from a friend in Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter asking if I could make some posters of some of the many Black trans women and femmes who were being murdered that summer. There were about 6 murders. It was the summer of 2015. BLM was about a year old, and there was going to be a protest in San Francisco with Janelle Monáe, and people want to make sure that the messages of Say Her Name and Black Trans Lives Matter were visible and present. And sometimes we have these openings and invitations that are pivotal moments in our lives and our work. If we step into them, it will transform our work and our relationships. Before I got this invitation, I wouldn't have felt that it was appropriate for me to create these portraits as a white person. I wouldn't have wanted to make them without being grounded in relationships. But once I started making them with people, I started getting requests from trans people all over the country to honor people who'd been killed in their communities in Tampa, in Atlanta, in New York, working with family members to create portraits of their loved ones to raise money for funeral expenses. And doing these very quick drawings, it became a way to, for me personally, and for all of us in a collective process online, to try and visibilize our grief and hold our grief and be with each other together, to be in compassion. So these are just a few of many, many memorial portraits. And at a certain point, this is from the protest. This is Miss Major with the portraits. At a certain point, I decided I needed to make art with and about living trans people of color. That we need to honor our dead, but we also need to fight like hell for the living. Or as the group Breakout says, give us our roses while we are alive. So with people all across the country, I started a project called the Trans Life and Liberation Art Series. Every week, a trans artist would create a collaborative portrait of and with a living trans activist or artist of color. This was the first one of Isha Love. There's a long history of art that's been very harmful and exploitive to trans people. A lot of artists have furthered their careers making work about trans people without our consent. And some of the art has caused great harm. It's cost people their relationships, their jobs, and sometimes their safety. I've had this experience as a trans person, and as a white person, I have the constant opportunity to make mistakes in the way I make my art with and about other people and to violate my anti-racist principles. So I was very clear that I wanted this project to be grounded in a very different process. Writer Saidiya Hartman said, "Care is the antidote to violence." I wanted to make art in a way that placed relationships and care at the center of the process. I wanted everyone involved to love what we made together, to get paid to participate, and to be the primary owners of their own image, so they can use the art however they wanted to improve the conditions of their lives. I work with a local ecological justice organization called Movement Generation, and one of the many brilliant things they say is, the fundamental unit of society is not the individual, it's the relationship. I believe that art and social change emerge through networks and generations of relationships, not by unique acts of genius or bravery by isolated individuals. This was a fundamentally relational project. There were 10 different trans artists, many participants. This portrait of Isha Love, she's a young black trans woman who, many of you can probably read it. She spent 4 years in a men's jail without trial because she couldn't afford bail. She was incarcerated for defending her own life, as many trans people of color are. Isha and I made this portrait together, and then we used it to help raise money to support her in her life after release from jail. Many of the folks in this project were currently or formerly incarcerated, and the art was a way to show care between people inside and outside, to say, you are not disposable. We haven't forgotten about you. We're gonna keep fighting for you. This is a portrait of Elle Hearns, who is a brilliant young black trans organizer. She's now launching a national organization called the Marsha P. Johnson Institute to end violence against black trans people. I'm gonna go through some of the art we created in the series. This is a portrait of Kay Barrett, who's a poet. I love this portrait and the way it visibilizes and celebrates disability and gender. This is another portrait of Miss Major, living unapologetically in her truth, being a possibility model for everyone. It's so significant to me that so much of the art was between trans people of different generations. It means so much to us because so many of our families are not supportive, are not in our lives, and because we have so few trans elders. They're really a treasure. And because so few trans youth are cherished the way they should be. This is a portrait of Juniper Gia Cordova Goff, who works at the Transgender Law Center in Oakland. It was really important to me to work with other emerging trans artists. So this is a portrait by Edsy Betts, who is in LA, and they created this portrait of Malcolm Shanks. This is by Selva Neblina, a portrait of organizer Raquel Willis, also a local and national trans powerhouse. Erin Lang by Ripley Bennett. This is a self-portrait by Noah Jenkins. Noah, I believe, was 19, and it was just really moving to have someone do a self-portrait about their own power and survival. Shan Davis by Eben Lee. This was another portrait that I made in collaboration with Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement. It's an image of Cristina Lopez, and this was one of the many pieces that was made very quickly to support action. And people had been fighting for years to free Cristina from immigrant detention, and because I had a relationship with folks in Familia, when a judge decided that they would allow her to be freed on bail that week, and we needed to raise the money, we could work together and communicate with her family and create a portrait and release it strategically along with a fundraising site to generate the funds to get her out of prison and get her free. This is a portrait with my friend Mickey Bradford, who's an organizer with Southerners on New Ground. This is a historical document. This was made, again, like in 24 hours. And this happened, it's a document of what happened after they passed HB2, the anti-trans bathroom bill in North Carolina. Organizers went and staged a protest that night in outside the governor's mansion. And after hours of protesting, Mickey just decided she was going to Vogue right in front of the police. And it's just such a beautiful testament to Black trans cultural survival and the sacred magic that is voguing. And this was a way for us to put it out, I think, the day after that action happened and amplify the fight against HB2. This is a portrait of Janetta Johnson, who's another local treasure. She's the director of TGI Justice Project. If you don't know about them, check them out. They do weekly mail nights supporting trans folks in prison. And after the Pulse massacre in Orlando, you may remember that it was used as an excuse to start getting tons and tons of more police into Pride celebrations across the country. And so Janetta and other folks, Janetta had been elected a marshal of San Francisco Pride, and TGI Justice Project and other groups, Breakout New Orleans, decided that it was not safe for them to bring their folks to Pride. And they decided to withdraw from Pride celebrations. And Janetta and Black Lives Matter and many other groups put out a public statement. And because we had this relationship, a relationship that began like 8 years ago with me working with Major and working with TGI Justice Project, we were able to make this overnight, and it was used in their press release, and it was a visual at the celebration to amplify their statement. So some of these pieces happened very quickly, and some we worked for months and months on. This is an image of Kai Peterson. Does anyone here know who Kai is? Great, I'm so glad to share this with you. So Kai is a young Black trans man who grew up in rural Georgia, and he was incarcerated for defending his own life, defending himself against sexual assault. And Kai was sentenced to 20 years in prison. So I was able to get in touch with Kai and his partner Pinky, and we worked together to create a piece of art. And we also worked with organizations across the country, asking Kai and Pinky, what do you want? How do you want to use this art? Is there any way we can use this art to help free you, to amplify your campaign, to get you media? And we worked with Survived and Punished and Forward Together and other organizations who I can't remember the name of right now because I'm nervous. And it was, I'll show you the process of creating it. Every single piece, everyone sees the drafts. Nothing goes forward or gets shared unless people love it. No matter how many, sometimes I nail in the first time, or sometimes it takes many iterations. So we come up with the text together. I make sure that they love the way they look, they love the way they're represented. And after working for months, we were able to use this image to get people excited about a Twitter chat. Free Kai, Justice for Kai was trending on May 17th. We were able to get almost 8,000 signatures on a petition to free Kai and to get national media coverage for his case. Last year, Kai was up for parole after serving 5 years in prison, and we all thought he was going to get out, and he wasn't freed. And so now he's serving 10 years of he's serving the next 5 years of his sentence. it's important to me that when this art is done, when the collaboration to create the piece is done, that doesn't mean the relationship is done. The process of creating the work gives the work a different meaning and power. So when I work with Kai, and so many of these people, I am humbled to be in relationship with them. It is an honor to work with them. I want to show the next slide. After creating the piece, Kai and Pinky decide to make pendants of it. This is a picture of Kai's mom's hands. So the struggle continues. Kai knows that he's not forgotten. I encourage you all to look up his case, write letters to the governor. There's a template you can use online. I'm committed to Kai's freedom and the knowledge that all our liberation is bound together and we're in it for life. I want to just end with a little treasure from my tradition on the theme of compassion. It's a little Yiddish saying that is, "Es ist nito a ganzere Sach wie zerbrochene Herz." There is nothing more whole than a broken heart. If we want wholeness, we must have compassion, and we must hold the brokenness.